Welcome to Future Stocks. This interview is brought to you by Imagine, the Institute of Future Studies at Iqra University, and COMSTECH, Organization of Islamic Cooperation Standing Committee on Scientific and Technological Cooperation of OIC. We are delighted to present a leading scientist belonging to an OIC member state, Jordan. Honorable Dr. Moneef Zou'bi has been an advocate of science and technology for sustainable development for around 30 years. Since July 2016, he has been serving as the senior advisor to the Interaction Council, which is an independent international organization that mobilizes the experience and international contacts of a group of statesmen who have held the highest office in their own countries. Dr. Moneef joined the Islamic World Academy of Sciences, which is an international scientific NGO based in Jordan and affiliated with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Dr. Moneef was appointed as the Director General of IAS from May 1998 till September 2019. Dr. Moneef has participated in many international scientific and technological collaboration involving more than 57 countries. He is a judge of the prestigious Templeton Prize as well. Thank you, Dr. Moneef, for joining us in Future Talks from Amman, Jordan today.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here.
Professor, we will start with your personal journey, and we would like to know what was your childhood like, your primary education, what was the situation and condition in your childhood?
I was born and raised in Amman, Jordan, which was back in the 60s and 70s, was was a small town really compared to the big metropolitan area it is today. I grew up in a house that valued education. My father, my late father, who was a banker, always thought that education was a primary tool at the disposal of young men and women to make the world a better place and make themselves a better place. And my late mother was a headmistress at a school and a teacher for over 30 years. So education in our household was an essential feature of our lives. Um, and I suppose it's because of that that I was sent to um, a private school in Jordan. I was fortunate enough to be sent to a private school. And then after finishing my O levels, I was sent by my parents to England for my university and postgraduate education.
Okay, sir, so how did your interest grow in science? Who inspired you, and if there were any teachers or mentors that you would like to talk about?
Um, I think emanating from the fact that I grew up in a household that had a lot of respect for um, educated people and for science. I also personally developed a rather inquisitive mind at a young age. I always wanted to know a little bit more than what I saw on TV or read in newspapers or saw in movies. I was very much involved in digging up information about things, about scientific phenomena, about eminent scientists, about uh, our own civilization, the Islamic civilization. I wanted to learn a little bit more. So this eagerness to learn has always been there. And in part, it was a hobby and a pastime of mine to learn a little bit more and to discuss scientific issues and scientific matters with senior people, with friends. That has always been there at the back of my mind. Um, and I would read books in Arabic, English. I would look at newspaper articles. Of course, that was a long time before the internet and the information overflow that we have now. So it was not so easy, but um, I think I'm one of those people who has always been interested in learning more about life, about people, about science. And that has always been a source of pleasure for me to investigate, to try and understand uh, the science behind certain things and so on and so forth. Um, so I'm one of those, I would say, fortunate people who are or have been always interested in science and the scientific inquiry.
And who have inspired you? Any
Ah,
contemporary scientists?
well, I think at school we had a number of very good teachers at my school in Jordan back in the 60s and 70s. We particularly had a very um, uh, eminent math teacher who was really, what we see in movies as math teachers. He was slightly disorganized, but he was overflowing with information about maths and scientific facts. Um, I also, having read the biographies and autobiographies of a number of um, eminent scientists from the present, from the 20th century, and from the past, people like uh, uh, Ibn Sina, people like Ibn al-Haytham in the past. And I have always been fascinated by the fact that these people were uh, scientists in a number of ways. They were not only linguists and religious scholars, but also physicists, medical doctors, astronomers. So this, from the golden age of the Islamic civilization, I would name most of the eminent names that you and I know, I think have inspired me um, to investigate more and learn more about science.
And sir, how do you suggest motivating young people from Muslim countries, both girls and boys, to learn science and participate more in scientific disciplines?
I think the starting point has to be that we have to educate young men and women in most of our Muslim countries uh, and expose them to the fact that we are not new to this. Muslims have historically been at the forefront of the scientific enterprise historically. If you just Google a few names of eminent Muslim scientists of the past, you'd realize that such individuals, such towering figures, such as Al-Khawarizmi, Ibn Sina, Al-Razi, Ibn al-Haytham, uh, were really the Nobel Prize laureates of science of 1,000 years ago. So I think our children, young boys and girls at schools, first of all, have to realize that there is a precedent in this. Our civilization has produced scientists of the past who were very eminent. Secondly, I think developing and cultivating a scientific mind would be a good door opener for our young people, uh, even those who are going into careers other than science. So it's an added advantage for any young boy or girl in any school to be scientifically aware of things and develop a scientific mind. I think those young students in our civilized countries um, uh, would benefit tremendously by developing a scientific method in their own mind and scientific thinking. Thirdly, I think today we have to remind young people, our children, current students at universities, that it's so much easier than it was before to access science and scientific information. In the old days, people would have to go to libraries or ask the local government department, science museum, and so on and so forth. But today, young people have access to a huge reservoir of scientific knowledge at their fingertips. Fourthly, I think, and that is important, science and scientific thinking would ultimately make all of us probably better human beings who are more capable of serving our family, our community, our country, and humanity better. Because we would develop an understanding of major problems that the world faces, such as climate change, water scarcity, flooding, famine, pandemics, and therefore our capacity, if we develop this scientific way of thinking, to um, uh, be better off as individuals and as members of the community would be better. So essentially, these are the reasons that I would, or explanations that I would present to young people today as to why I would advise them to develop a culture of science in their heart and mind.
So, Dr. Moneef, you have numerous scientific contributions and you have participated in many international scientific and technological collaboration involving more than 57 countries. We were wondering if you could share some of the key challenges that you have faced and how you have overcome them.
Thank you. I think I realized at an early stage that the 57 member countries of the OIC were not really doing as well as other countries in the domain of science, technology, and innovation. So my personal challenge was to try and come up with an understanding of why this problem exists. Uh, now, um, as a result of this situation, I discovered that I had to um, talk to as many people as possible who are specialists in science, technology, and innovation policy to try and come up with answers and solutions that can be implemented by OIC countries in their quest to utilize the tool of science, technology, and innovation for the sake of development. I think the 57 member countries of the OIC um, deserve to have our people, our citizens in all our countries, um, uh, deserve to have a chance to live a normal, healthy, prosperous life and to have their problems addressed by governments and by leaders, utilizing the tools of science, technology, and innovation. So that was the macro challenge, if you like, that I've always had in the back of my mind. At the personal level, of course, sometimes it's not easy to really develop the right understanding of the situation. Sometimes you are faced with difficulties whenever you are involved in the scientific enterprise. Uh, um, you are involved with challenges of the lack of resources for your institution and for the work that you're trying to do. Financial resources, that is, and sometimes material resources. So being involved in the socio-economic development sector is in itself a challenge for the person involved and for the community of scientists trying to work in the development sector. However, it's a rewarding challenge because uh, sometimes you see the results of your work and you see pockets of success in countries in the scientific enterprise that are gratifying to see and rewarding. Um, so it is a challenge, but I think it's a gratifying challenge as well.
Dr. Moneef, you have written extensively on science and technology issues, science education, sustainable development, water issues from a Middle Eastern perspective, and you have given lectures on such topics in over 25 countries, including Canada and United States. And you have been the Director General of IAS as well. So, can you please share the main challenges Muslim countries are facing for sustainable growth?
I think the majority of Muslim countries gained their independence and actually became states um, following the Second World War. So we have been independent countries essentially for about 70 years. Now, during this period, uh, there have been many political problems in many parts of the Islamic world. Political problems that have undermined national efforts to achieve socio-economic development. Some of these political problems are of our own making, but most are of the making of the others. Um, and I think a lot of progress has been made by individuals, individual human beings, that is, individual countries, institutions, and countries in the domain of advancement and socio-economic development. However, I think we have still a long way to go. As countries that belong to the organization of the Islamic Conference, in terms of achieving economic and social advancement for our people. Um, and science, technology, and innovation provide an essential tool for us to do that. I think we need to convince our political leaders of the value of science as a tool to achieve socio-economic advancement. And in the COVID-19 pandemic, I think we have a lesson. Many of our medical scientists have been calling upon our political leaders to take certain actions in terms of the strategy adopted or to be adopted to address, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. So science has, again, proven to everybody its value as a means to address problems. However, in the long term, we need to get our leaders interested and supportive of science, technology, and innovation so that the resources can be allocated for the scientific enterprise. We need to get our academic workers, university professors, and those involved in the scientific enterprise to try and utilize their knowledge for the benefit of society more by developing products, goods, and services that have direct impact on the well-being of the people. Thirdly, I think we have to get our young people, as I said earlier, excited about science and the prospect of utilizing or using science as a means to come up with solutions to national problems and global problems. And I think, as I started off, I think the Islamic world is richly endowed with natural resources, with human resources that are probably dispersed or not working in research groups as much as they should. And I think the Islamic world has the capacity not only to address its own problems, but contribute to addressing global problems. Problems such as water scarcity, climate change, health insecurity, food insecurity, and so on and so forth. And once again, become a major player in the SDI enterprise at the world level.
Dr. Moneef, one of your research project was historical analysis of science in Islamic civilization and its implications for contemporary practice of science in Islam. Could you please elaborate on this project for our audience and also tell us what has been the role of governments and financial institutions in developing a humane world, a world where science was also developed, and what was the role that we had in the Islamic world, and what you think should be the role today, the role of governments as well as the financial institution like the Islamic Bank?
Well, I think to answer all your questions, we would need a 2-hour webinar, 3-hour webinar even, to try and squeeze in all the answers to your list of questions, my friend. However, I would say that the essential idea behind your very clever questions, if I may say so, is patronage. Patronage of science. In the research project you referred to, I was with my colleagues trying to understand why it was at certain historical eras of the past that there was success in the scientific enterprise. We were trying to understand the environment in which scientists operated and the incentives that were offered by the state and by the head of state to scientists to become involved in research and produce results. Now, the primary outcome of our research actually ties up with your other questions, and that is political patronage. Whenever political patronage of science and scientists is available or provided, then scientists are able to focus on their work and work a lot harder to produce results because they have been entrusted with the support of the state and the head of state. Um, and scientists who have the support of um, patrons uh, um, often succeed in producing results more quickly. And this is one of the major factors affecting success in the scientific enterprise in the Islamic world. We all have to identify the means to support science at all levels, starting with political patronage by the head of state, institutional patronage by providing the researchers with the facilities to undertake their research. Thirdly, financial incentives to enable the scientists to focus on their research and not have to sort of undertake teaching duties at universities or research centers to supplement their income. And I think in the same framework, the role of development banks comes into play. I think development banks, including the Islamic Development Bank, have an essential role to play in supporting the scientific enterprise in the Islamic world. And in fact, the Islamic Development Bank has recently started two major programs to support scientific projects throughout the Islamic world. I think there is a new spirit there right now and a new SDI policy that promises to be quite effective in activating scientific research in the Islamic world, scientific research that would lead to addressing real life problems on the ground. What others or what some people may call utilitarian research. So the general title of our discussion, I would say right now, is support. All this falls under the category of supporting the scientific enterprise, from the head of state all the way through to the state and to development agencies and development banks.
Sir, while talking to the eminent scientists from the Muslim countries and interviewing them, the common problem that they have talked about, what is the barriers in promoting scientific original researches, is the lack of laboratories or the facilities. That was one. The other one was the lack of collaboration or providing a platform that can allow them to connect with each other belonging to different countries working on the same project. The third one was the gap between the researchers, academic researchers, and the industry. For instance, one of the scientists said that there is a gap between the pharmaceutical industry and the academicians working in the universities. Academicians in the universities do not have the same kind of labs that those pharmaceutical companies have, but they do not have any kind of collaboration where they can use those labs to come up with original researches and original products. I mean, you have had a very long career working in collaboration. How do you see these three complaints or some problems that the other scientists have been talking about?
I think the um, framework required to address all these problems would be a national science, technology, and innovation policy. Uh, a national science, technology, and innovation policy would take care of the majority of such problems uh, and address the needs and requirements of the various stakeholders. These problems that you have outlined are very much common to the majority of Islamic countries um, and need to be addressed in order for the what we call the STI ecosystem to become more successful. So an essential component of or a pillar, if you like, also of the STI ecosystem is a comprehensive national STI policy, science, technology, and innovation policy, that would identify objectives at the national level in the domain of science, that would identify priorities also, that will address briefly funding mechanisms for science, technology, and innovation, um, identify stakeholders and the role of stakeholders in achieving success in science, technology, and innovation, would basically be a completely comprehensive document that would address all these issues. And an offshoot of that, or an offshoot based on that, would be um, identifying bottlenecks in the implementation of the policy, whether financial or administrative or cultural even. And when I say cultural, I'm specifically referring to this culture of the lack of innovation in some of our academic circles. And by that I mean the lack of will, if you like, in the hearts and minds of some uh, um, academics at universities to um, bridge the divide with industry and develop products, services, algorithms that have commercial value. I think this is an issue that we need to address in most of our countries. And I think also um, uh, we need to introduce a set of long-term sustainable incentives for the science community so that we really get scientists involved in the downstream in the technology, in the application of science for the benefit of society and for commercial success. And also cultivate a sense of community. There are many reasons why scientists in our countries tend to be or prefer to operate at the individual level rather than at a group level. Um, I think with the appropriate set of incentives, maybe this difficulty that we face in the majority of our countries can also be addressed.
Dr. Moneef, you have worked for a long time contributing to science as well as promoting science and creating collaborations. What has been the role of imagination, if there is any, uh, that is required, or that imagination, the role of imagination in creating collaboration as well as have and developing a scientific project?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I would use the word ambition and dreaming of a better future, if that's the right word. Um, um, as I said, those of us who have read the history of science or history in general um, realize that in our civilization um, there were periods in the past where our civilization, the Islamic civilization, was a world leader in science, technology, innovation, commerce, trade, um, and contribution to human civilization. So the dream that people like me have, having read that history, would be to try and emulate the success of the past in the 20th and the 21st century. That has been the dream of many development workers. It's something that has been right there, uh, high up uh, um, um, on the virtual horizon of our imagination, if that's the right word. Um, so all big ideas, all big achievements start with a dream. And those of us who are fortunate enough or even or determined enough to try and achieve their dreams very often succeed. And if they do not succeed completely, they at least establish the framework for future generations to proceed and achieve success um, in whatever domain they happen to be working in.
Okay, Dr. Moneef, you are aware that OIC goals include a wide variety of issues, ranging from peace and security to combating climate change, overcoming sustainable development challenges, alleviating poverty, and overcoming diseases and health problems. Our growing understanding is that research and development are key components for creating a sustainable, equitable, and a humane world. You have been active in global sustainable development for many years. What is your opinion on how science, technology, and innovation can help in making a sustainable, equitable, and humane world?
I think in the majority of OIC countries, we face two levels of problems. We face uh, natural or naturally occurring problems, um, such as water scarcity, food insecurity, climate change, although climate change is natural and man made at the same time. Um, that's one level of the difficulties that we face. The other level is that the economies in the majority of OIC countries are not um, progressing. They're not developing as fast as, or not keeping up with the population growth. So therefore, our people are not feeling the benefit of the economic boom that we have gone through in the past at various points. So we have economic problems and we have natural problems to address, like all other countries, really. Science, technology, and innovation is an essential tool in addressing both the problems, both the types of problem. We need science to address the issue of climate change. And I know in Pakistan, you have had an early interest in climate change. And I think at some point, the late eminent Professor Ishfaq Ahmed headed the Prime Minister's Commission on Climate Change um, uh, back in the 90s. So we need science in the Islamic world to address the various sustainable development goals and ensure that our population have adequate water for drinking, and for food production and industry. Our population have adequate food. We are trying to sustain our biodiversity, keep our environment clean, and essentially address all of our natural problems. So that's one level where science can be used. The other level is science that leads to commercial success or to wealth creation. Science that leads to innovation, that leads to coming up with products and services of value that can eventually become apps on your mobile phone or programs for your computer or algorithms for whatever um, equipment you're developing. So that's another level of that exposes the value of science, technology, and innovation. So I think whichever way we look at development, at human development, we would find that science is there as a means to address the development sector in question, whether it's in the broad domain of the sustainable development goals, or specifically related to the monetary or economic aspects of science. But then again, because the sustainable development goals takes on board innovation also as a means, as a sustainable development goal in its own right, so the whole ecosystem is interconnected. And we would be well advised in our countries to try and um, um, get the whole science and political community united in a drive to achieve economic success for the country as well as address the sustainable development goals through science, because that's the only way forward. And countries that were at the same level of advancement as the Islamic world, as Islamic countries in the past, have come up really dramatically over the last 30 to 50 years. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the examples of countries such as South Korea, which at some point in the early 60s was as economically advanced as countries like Egypt or Turkey, our friends and fellow OIC members in Malaysia have come up quite dramatically in terms of economic success and high technology exports um, by that country. Um, um, in your part of the world, also countries like Thailand has come up in the ranking. Indonesia, uh, further west, Turkey, um, um, Jordan to some extent, Gulf countries, North Africa. Egypt is trying to revamp its SDI ecosystem. So the essential message, I would say, is that there is no doubt that science, technology, and innovation can help our countries economically and can help our countries in terms of addressing its other concerns, environmental, um, uh, industrial, human problems as well. And this is why all of us in the science community should try and, get as many people on board and as many people excited about science as we can.
Dr. Moneef, you have had a very long career, and you have contributed to sciences a lot. And we would like to know some of the key milestones you have achieved as the Director General of Islamic Academy of Science and in fulfilling the OIC action plans.
Well, at the professional level, I think I and many others from my organization and friends and so on have managed to achieve a number of virtual milestones, I would call them, rather than um, in the domain of science, technology, and innovation. I think when I first started in international scientific collaboration, not so many countries of the OIC had a national Academy of Sciences. I mean, Pakistan, of course, had a National Academy of Sciences since the 40s, but not so many OIC countries uh, at that time had a National Academy of Sciences. So I think I and many others have succeeded in encouraging countries to establish national academies of sciences. I think I and many others from throughout the Islamic world have succeeded in getting countries to adopt national SDI policies and realize that this science-based development enterprise is a very uh, comprehensive exercise that has to be done based on a certain philosophy in terms of science and development or research and development. I think we have also seen a growing interest in quality education or quality in higher education. Um, Many others and myself, I think, were involved in introducing the concept of university ranking in the Islamic world. Now, many people may argue that this is a good or a bad thing. That's fine. That's open for discussion. But I think it was important for us at some point to expose the level of our universities, whether it's very good or not so good, to our people so that they know that, back in the late 90s in the Islamic world, almost no university or no university from the Islamic world was ranked amongst the world's top 500 universities. Another possible milestone would be um, at the personal level was to be able to reach out to decision makers in many OIC countries, heads of state, prime ministers, including in Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Middle East, Malaysia, and to get them excited and supportive, to get them to support the scientific enterprise. So I would not point out to a single um, milestone. I would look at the whole um, narrative of my career as a series of milestones, hopefully that uh, may have contributed to our to long-awaited renaissance of science in the Islamic world. Um, Also, I would point out to a number of publications that I have been involved in that have been um acclaimed by specialists as pointing out to certain serious difficulties that have developed. You mentioned in your kind introduction the UNESCO Science Report of 2010. Uh, I think as at the personal level, I would count that as um, an important milestone in my life because I and my colleagues were able to foresee uh, how things would develop in the Arab and the Islamic world at the political level a few years before things actually develop on the ground. And, um, you know, we managed to um, uh, sound the alarm bell quite early to tell our leaders, our political leaders, that we need to move really and address serious problems if we are to avoid uh, political turmoil. Now, some countries have heeded the call and listened to the advice that I and others had to offer, and other countries did not. Um, um, and I think it's important always to try and draw the attention of politicians and decision makers to situations or problems that they may face in the future and to try and stop such problems from developing.
Sir, you have visited more than 60 countries and enjoy high level contact in most of them. How do you suggest increasing cooperation and collaboration among OIC scientists to fulfill OIC goals?
I think most scientists in the OIC uh, should realize and do actually realize that the problems we face in the majority of our countries are very similar. It's true we may belong to different countries with different political systems, but the problems that we face as individual countries are very similar. Secondly, I think um, we can talk about the value of South-South cooperation in science and technology as being more cost-effective than North-South scientific collaboration. That is, unless the North is willing to really plow in a lot of support towards enhancing North-South collaboration. So I think there is real value and a great advantage in cultivating South-South collaboration. Thirdly, um, I think incentives can be introduced to encourage uh, South-South collaboration amongst the scientists of the OIC. Fourthly, I think now the standard has become very high in countries of the South. You know, no longer do we have to look northwards or westwards for eminent researchers like we used to in the past. I think we can find in our midst top researchers and highly cited researchers and eminent researchers who are equally, if not probably more successful than their counterparts in the West. Um, so there are a number of good reasons why we should try and enhance South-South collaboration. Probably the framework that uh, can be useful in developing this is incentives. Incentives in terms of financial incentives, publishing incentives, and in terms of governments facilitating interaction between the science members of the science community of the various countries.
Dr. Moneef, how do you think the global COVID-19 pandemic has impacted OIC member states in attaining OIC's action plan for 2030?
I think it has, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected every single human being throughout the world in some form or another. Um, I think the speed with which the pandemic spread surprised everybody, even the specialists in China and the West and the Islamic world. I think the severity of the um, impact of the pandemic on human life, on the economy, on unemployment, on education, on travel, on business, um, is unprecedented, and it will take us many years to realize the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on human life. Now, as far as the Islamic world is concerned, well, the problems um, that have uh, developed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic were a lot similar to the problems faced by all other countries in the world, really. Uh, uh, and that is the lack of preparedness. We were not prepared for the pandemic in terms of data, in terms of public health specialists uh, getting together and explaining to us, the people, the seriousness of the pandemic and instituting uh, actions by governments to uh, halt the spread of the pandemic and mitigate the fallout, the outcome, the consequences of the pandemic. We were caught unaware of, we didn't have the data to know, for example, how prepared our hospitals are or our health system is to receive COVID-19 patients. Um, we also realized, not only in OIC countries, but throughout the world, that our emergency measures were not really tested, and our capacity to produce face masks and ventilators were not ready. Our facilities were not ready, to say the least. I think what is particularly unfortunate for our countries, apart from the problems that all of us as human beings faced, was our lack of capacity to produce a vaccine. Um, I think what makes me a little bit uh, um, uncomfortable is the fact that no OIC country offered to develop a vaccine like what has been developed by Pfizer or Moderna or China and the Emirates and so on. I think the Emirates is the only country that has, United Arab Emirates, that has gotten involved in developing a vaccine um, with the help of the Chinese. So I think there are many lessons to be learned from the COVID-19 pandemic for all of us as humans and for OIC countries in particular.
Dr. Moneef, thank you so much for being with us. And I mean, we would like you to share anything that you want with our audience that we have missed out in our questions.
Well, thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to talk to you today. Um, I've always enjoyed interacting with not only the scientists and technologists of Pakistan, but visiting Pakistan on so many occasions in the various cities of Pakistan. Um, I'm quite hopeful that I'll be able to visit Pakistan again as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions go away and to re-establish contact with all my friends in your country and also perhaps get to um, visit your setup also and get to meet you face to face, hopefully sometime within this year. And thank you for your interest and your patience, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Dr. Moneef Zou'bi, we salute you for your service to humanity. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching us today. We will bring you another leading scientist from the one of the member states of OIC in our next episode. Thank you and stay well.